Good, good, good. I think that, the responses that you had to talk about your giving is really, really interesting. Everybody has their own different way of giving, and also their own perception of themselves in the giving sphere, right? Of investing into social programs. And so I think that today I'm really excited. And actually, it's kind of nice that we have a little bit of a smaller group, because then maybe we can have a little more interaction. So feel free, if you have a question, to lift your hand, because I can see you guys, and you can interrupt me. But I think that the place to start really is to figure out, how do we, as collective giving, because this is about collective giving and changing philanthropy, is to start with, what is a philanthropist, right? I mean, for so long, this is who we thought of as a philanthropist, right? The Carnegie Mellons, Warren Buffett. And so it's hard to see yourself as a philanthropist. But the interesting thing is that with the true makeup of giving in the United States, it's actually 68% individuals, and those people tend to give only a median about between 1,200 and a couple of thousand a year, which is, I find very, very fascinating. It's not the majority of these big Gates foundations, but actually individuals that are giving so much to the community. And look at 18% is foundations, and that includes the Gates Foundation. 5% is corporations. And of those 68% individuals, I find is so fascinating, is that it's women that are doing most of the giving. They are 40% more likely to donate than men. And women give more often, and they donate more in dollars than men. And if you are a female-headed household, you tend to give, even though you may be making less as a household, you give more, which I find is just so fascinating, right? And so if you look at us right here, us five, we are the face of philanthropy in the United States. And so I think it's trying to make sure that people understand that there is, that we are philanthropists, and that women are giving more than ever to organizations that are making social change in the United States. And so there's I want to share this real quick before we start. There is a great group of women, it's called the Women Institute of Philanthropy in Indiana University, and they have this great interview, and I wanted to share it with you both before we started, because this really is about changing the perception of who philanthropists are and the impact that we can have in the community. So I want to share this.
When most people think about philanthropists, or even if you were to Google it and see what comes up, you'd see the historical context of, Rockefeller and Ford, right?
People are viewed as needing to be rich. Multi-billionaires, millionaires, famous people.
It feels a little bit like a itchy sweater in a way. Think of Bruce Wayne's parents.
I think the term philanthropist has a connotation of old white man, or maybe like a MacArthur Foundation, a Rockefeller Foundation.
Philanthropist, rich, wealthy, on TV, or organization, not just a regular person.
I have been phenomenally fortunate, and I think it's my responsibility to give some of that fortune back.
And she would, raise a certain amount of money, and I would try to beat that, and she'd go back and forth. So we would raise $50,000, $60,000.
And I get to thinking well, what about the people who don't have a home to go to? I couldn't help everyone, but the 30 rooms that I secure will at least help, a lot of them.
Myself, along with 33 other women have decided to invest in the success of women and girls on the south side of Chicago.
So we sold world's finest chocolate, and I had my box, and I went door to door and raised funds. And in some ways, that is being a philanthropist.
I didn't know that you didn't have to be rich to be a philanthropist.
But it's not a money that you always have to give. It's your time, your energy, your knowledge.
It's giving what you can.
People need to know they can each make a difference, even if you start in a small way. I've been, really pleased that Facebook, has that charitable giving, because my nephews and my nieces have done that for their birthday. And I think that's awesome.
You can give someone a fish, right? You can show them how to fish, or you can revolutionize the fishing industry. And I think it's all good.
It can be a woman, it can be a person of color, it can be someone who's young. I want to be able to recall more people who look like me.
If we abandon that idea of what a philanthropist looks like, what a philanthropist have, what the power they have, the change they can make, and open that up and bust that door wide open, I think we have the potential to create even greater change.
I am a philanthropist.
I am a philanthropist.
I am a philanthropist.
I'm a philanthropist.
I am a philanthropist.
I am a philanthropist.
I am a philanthropist.
I am a philanthropist.
And so I am a philanthropist as well. And so I wanted to, let me get out of this, I'm sorry. The thing is like, you're all excited, like, yes, we all are philanthropists and we can all do great change within the community. But the truth is then you start thinking about, okay, I can create all this wonderful change, and us as individuals can come together and we can do this. And oops.
When most people think about philanthropy,
there we go. But how can I change the world if I can't find my socks? Does anyone else feel this way? Like, great, I'm a philanthropist. Let's go make change and impact in the world. How? And so, and so I find it really rewarding if there's other opportunities and people who can help us do that, right? So today, we probably, if you're not involved in collective giving or another foundation, then your giving probably is sporadic, right? So it is, someone comes to you and they're working on a campaign for the American Cancer Society, and they say, will you please give $50 to the American Cancer Society? Or you have a kid that comes down the street and is donating for something and you give for that. Or you have someone who, is running in a race for a disease and they want you to donate for that, right? Or you're invited to a gala, a dinner, right? Your boss invites you, you're at one of the tables, and and then you give under pressure because you feel like you have to give, you've been drinking and your boss is sitting next to you, right? And that for a long time has been my giving, right? I mean, you just kind of, or I give because my mom gave to an organization. Right? And so because she had been giving to an organization, then you feel like this responsibility that you need to be giving to that organization. And, but what if we could change things around, right? So what if a group of people came to your door and they said, hey, Sarah, how would you like it if we understand that you want to make an impact in Denver, okay? And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to scan the city, and we're going to take applications from all these different organizations you may not have ever heard about that are doing great things in the grassroots level. And we're going to take hundreds of these applications and we're going to review them for you, personally for you, Sarah. And so then we're going to go and we're going to kind of weed them down. And then we're going to go into those organizations and we're going to do a site visit. And we may get it down to 40 organizations and we go and do site visits. And then we bring in another team who's going to review the financials. So they're going to look at their 990s. They're going to look at how much the salary is of the different people that are going, that are working at the nonprofit. They're going to look at their impact. And then they're also going to look at how many grants there are, other grants and other organizations that are funding them, right? So we're going to do all of that. And then after the financial review and the site visit and the application review, we're going to get it down to a short list, and we're going to come to you, Sarah, and we're going to let you look at it. And you get to vote what you want to do. It may take us about 8 or 9 months, but I think that you'll really find that these are organizations that you know are vetted and that are doing the impact that you want. They're not just the neighborhood organization, but you know that you're looking at a whole spread of different organizations and the different things they're doing in the community. So who wouldn't like that, right? Oh, and by the way, we're all volunteers. And we won't charge you for it. So basically that is collective giving. It's not only groups coming together and saying, we can help you do the research for this, but then it's also saying, I have hundreds of other women in the city who you don't know that want to do the same thing as you, and we're going to do it together. And we're going to have the impact, and we're going to be able to fund the organizations that really need it. The issue with high dollar donors, right? If you have a wealthy person in your city and they give a significant amount of money to an organization, which is great. I'm not saying that that's bad. That's really, really good. But they tend to then can manipulate some of the nonprofits because of the funding request, right? So if you have a high dollar person who's saying, oh, I don't necessarily think I want to fund that program, I'm going to do this program, even though that initial program may be very, very important to the organization. And they get to manipulate that. With collective giving, you have the power amongst a whole bunch of individuals who are giving, and they get to then put the power back into the community, which I think is just incredible. And that's why I'm involved in collective giving. So, this is one of our organizations called the Marin Fund. They do training for kids with Down syndrome. So we can talk about informal collective giving, right? So as women, and I'm going to be a little sexist here, but as women, we know better than anyone about informal collective giving. So it is the groups that do food drives, right? It may be church giving for a certain project. There's also great organizations that were started from informal collective giving, such as the Society for the Relief of Poor Widows. I say this because it was in 1797, and it was a bunch of women that came together and started this organization. In St. Louis, the Annie Malone Family Crisis Center. You may not know in Denver, but in St. Louis, Annie Malone was a very wealthy African-American woman who sold Black beauty products and made a lot of money, right? So she gave to the orphanage, and the orphanage was named after her. But what people don't know is that about 30 years before that, 15 women came together and collectively pooled their money and started the orphanage, because there was not an orphanage for African-American kids in St. Louis. So that's the story. It's the women behind that I am really interested in. The 15 women that got together and said, we're going to make a significant change in our community. And so then that started as well the formalized model of collective giving, which I don't know if you've ever heard of Colleen Willoughby, but she is the woman who started the formalized model of collective giving in the United States. And she did this in 1995 as a retired teacher because she felt like she wanted to give to the community, but she didn't have enough money to do it. And so she came together, brought all these 115 women the first year in Seattle, and started the Seattle Foundation of Women's Giving. And from that, their sisters talked to their sisters, and other women talked to other women, And you started to see small organizations of collective giving starting to start up in different states. And one started in here in St. Louis, which was the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund, right? And so we started in 1996, and we had two women, Shelby Shagrin and Susan Block, came together at a coffee shop and said, I want to do this. I want to do what Colleen's doing in Seattle. We can put people together. We can make an impact in our community. And so they did. They started in 2006. Their first grant was in 2007. And then in 2008, I'm going to go backwards, they were one of the founding members of Philanos, which is a brand new, well, they just renamed the network, but it's a group of national network of women's collective giving that started in 2008 and now has 75 organizations nationwide with 17,500 women, 17,500 women, which I think is just incredible. They're also in England and in Australia. And so all of these women get together every 18 months to support each other on their collective giving in the US. So let's get back to what Meredith was saying. Meredith, you talked about grassroots, right? And how important you felt like it was to give to grassroots, and how important it was to not have the unintended consequences of giving to organizations that might harm the community. And so what we've seen is that, you know, there's so many top-down giving, so many foundations and large corporations give top-down or come into a community and decide what is best for that community. And there's changes in philanthropy now that you'll see. Even the Gates Foundation has noticed that they were not doing as well coming in and doing top-down financing for communities because it wasn't working. And so even the Gates community has now, Gates Foundation has started to fund the Collective Women's Network to try to build collective giving. And the reason is because they tend to invest in grassroots, innovative nonprofits that are working in the community and living in the community. And I think that's where you start to say, okay, so how do you not create unintended consequences? It's by supporting people who are going through it and that live in that area, right? It's all grassroots. I'm sure you've heard the story about in Africa, the group that went in and they donated a bunch of mosquito netting. Have you heard this story? They went ahead and donated all of these mosquito netting to cut down on malaria in this part of Africa. And oh, it's great, and so it worked really well in one area. And so they thought, well, if it's working in one country in Africa, I can just make it work in another country in Africa. And when they did that, it was in a fishing village. And of course, these are very, very poor people. They distributed the malaria nets and they ended up using them for fishing nets. And because they were sprayed with insecticide, they ended up killing the fish and poisoning people with what they were using. And it's because they didn't understand the community. So they end up having two different colored nets then, right? So you fish with the white net and then you sleep with the orange net. And so, I mean, that's kind of an example of what can happen. But it happens in so many different organizations when they get too big and they really don't understand the community itself. And so the there's a Harvard Business Review article, and it's called Disruptive, I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna read this, Disruptive Innovation for Social Change. And it's a great article if you get the chance to read it. But it talks about how investments in early stage social nonprofits are essential to creating profound and lasting community change. These small nonprofits are catalytic innovators that disrupt the status quo of larger service organizations that are doing great work, but because of the structure constraints, because they're so large, they can't maneuver and take care of the immediate needs. And so I think that, you know, it's really important to understand, yes, you should be supporting these large nonprofits, but you also should be supporting these small nonprofits. But right now they're not. And so the part of the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund and so many of these collective women's groups is trying to invest in these small grassroots organizations, amplify their work, share their stories out in the community, and also give credibility to other funders. There's a lot of nonprofits, for instance, that are led by people of color who can't get traditional funding. And so for the Spirit of St. Louis or other women's collective giving to be the first grant becomes then a seal of approval for corporations and other larger foundations to give. And so it's important to be able to say, hey, we'll support you so that we can move and change the community. And by the way, women are more apt to donate to smaller, riskier nonprofits than men. Men tend to give to universities and large organizations. I find that very interesting. So our mission is to create a stronger St. Louis community through informed grant making by educating and inspire and engaging significant giving. So right now we're now getting close to 2.5 million that we've invested since 2007, the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund. And they're solely funded through our membership. Everyone gives $100 a month. Everyone gives exactly the same amount. And we all vote at the end of the year where the funding goes. And we use the community foundation who administers it, so we don't have our own 501c3. And our focus areas are very wide. Arts and culture, education, environment, health, social services. I mean, what else is there? Animals. And we would even support animals as long as it's helping humans. So one of the organizations, has anyone ever heard of the Little Bit Foundation? Raise your hand if you have. So the Little Bit Foundation started in St. Louis several years ago, and we were their first grant. This was a woman, Rose Hanley, who was delivering coats to one of the schools. And she worked really hard at making sure that she had the right sizes for each of the kids. And she put their name in each of the coats, right? And then they went and delivered them to a high needs school. And she was very excited. The kids were all excited and they were going to be able to help these children. So she comes back to the school because she wanted to still volunteer. And several weeks later, I think it was a month later, and she opened the closet and found the coats. So many of the coats hadn't been distributed. And she was devastated. She said that she cried all the way back home because nobody had taken the time to distribute the needed coats to the kids. And she couldn't understand why. Of course, this school is now closed, but at the time she was devastated, and she knew that they needed somebody in the school to make sure that the needs were taken care of. And so what they started was boutiques in all of these high need schools, and they have a special room. It's manned by several different volunteers, and they have food, clothing. They will call, if you guys say if there was a kid that needed eyeglasses, they would call to have a group come in to get them eyeglasses. They're basically like a mom and dad in the school, right? And so this has taken off, but we were their first grant, and we gave them credibility. And then different corporations have given to them. Now they are a multi-million-dollar organization, and they're being asked by cities all over the United States on how they can replicate this. This is very exciting. They even have washers and dryers for the kids. So there's some children that wouldn't come to school because they had dirty clothing or whatever, and they can just come in and do laundry. Parents can come and do laundry. And so it's been a phenomenal, wonderful foundation and one of our success stories. But it's so, as a funder, I'm like, yes, I was an angel investor into something that early on was difficult to get funding. We gave them credibility. the next one is the Soul Fisher Ministries. And I'm sorry I don't have any organizations in Denver because I'm not working in Denver, but I know that there is a collective giving group there, and Sandy Cook, well, she said she'd be happy to share any of the organizations that are going on in Denver, the small ones that they're working with. But Soul Fisher Ministries, this is a very interesting nonprofit within St. Louis. It's headed by a woman named Chantel Fisher. She's the one right in front with a big smile. Can you see her? She was in prison for 20 years, in and out of prison for 20 years, had made some bad decisions in her life. And at some point she decided, this is it, I'm done. I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna go back to school and I'm gonna make something of my life. And so she went and got her undergraduate degree at in St. Louis, Soul. And then she got a full scholarship to go to Washington University for her master's degree in social work. And when she finished her master's degree, she reached out. She wanted to start a nonprofit. And so she thought about it, and her daughter didn't get to see her daughter grow up. And so she missed not being able to tutor her daughter. Chantel's a very smart woman and very math oriented, and she missed that. And so she's like, I wanted to start a nonprofit where we tutor kids whose parents are incarcerated, because I think they're getting lost. It's hard. Usually they're being raised by a grandparent or a single spouse, and they don't have the support they need. And I want to do this tutoring program. So she did this kind of a pilot run. And she came to the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund, and she said she applied for a grant. Now she has like maybe 1 year of being a nonprofit, right? She didn't have much financials, but she had a great board of professors that were surrounding her from WashU. And so as a group, we all voted, and we voted to fund her. And so that became the first round of funding that she received from the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund. We ended up funding her multiple times. But now she's moved from just tutoring, but also doing housing for women coming out of prison as well. And in the last 2 years, she received $1 million from the Department of Justice and $1.5 million from the Department of Education for her work. And she's now tutoring 500 kids in the St. Louis city whose parents are incarcerated. And you're like, wow, right? Now, when she first applied to us for funding, she was a felon. She could not get any traditional loans. She could not go to a corporation and say, hey, I think this is something I want to do. What do you think? I mean, let's be realistic, right? She was probably not going to get funded. And so we took a risk with her. And, but she was smart, and she was capable, and she was passionate, and she had the right people around her. And so we were willing to take that step with her. And now she's doing incredible things in the community. And so not only is she doing all of that in the community, but she also was the organization, because she is that grassroots organization that Meredith was talking about, right? Because she is working with the kids in these very high needs neighborhoods. And when the COVID lockdown happened, she was small and was able to mobilize very quickly to go into Riverview Gardens, which is one of actually she went into several different schools, but Riverview Gardens, to start distributing lunches for the kids. Riverview Gardens opted not to do this. They were not, as a school district, going to distribute lunches. And so Chantel and the Soul Fisher Ministry said, okay, they're not doing it, we're doing it. And so they reached out to a catering company, and they reached out to a little bit the other organization that we funded. And they all partnered together, the three organizations, Little Bit, catering companies, and Soul Fisher, and they started distributing 3,000 lunches a day in the parking lot of a Baptist church. And so you look at that and you're like, oh my gosh, you know what, this could have went in a totally different direction, right? And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about people who understand the community that they're working in. They're talking about how they can support the community in a very flexible and quick way. And so I was so proud to hear about the work that she's doing and about all of our organizations. We've ended up funding over 90 organizations, and they're all very incredible small organizations that I had never heard about before I started with the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund. I think that's what's so incredible, is that I just didn't hear about it because they're small. So I know we're kind of moving a little bit fast, but I just wanted to kind of talk about a little bit about, if you have any questions about what collective giving is and how the process works.
We had Amy, a question from the chat asking, you know, when you do get asked to go to a gala or donate to a one-off cause, how do you respond?
Ooh, that's a really good one. So I've learned a couple of things. One is that I looked them up. I looked them up on Charity Navigator because I want to see, let me look at the last couple 990s, last couple of years of their giving, and decide if that's really where I want to invest some funding, right? And then I also have already pre-decided the beginning of the year, if there is any additional giving like that, a certain amount that I'm willing to give, right? But I think that it really does shape. There's some organizations that I have, and I'm not going to say who they are, but I have been invited to certain organizations, and then you do a little homework and you're like, well, that sounds a little funny. Why are they doing that? Or wait, they're doing pretty well. Or maybe why is the head of the board also an employee and getting paid? How can the head of the board be the boss of the executive director who's also the executive director of the boss? There's just some interesting things. And so I think that it's really important that if you do get involved, and you know what, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with galas and dinners. There's not. I mean, you may find out there's an organization that you're really interested in through the gala. But I think that you have to do your homework before you go. And I wasn't doing that before, honestly.
And then do you ever get pushback, or is it sort of an education opportunity? So when you politely say, I'm sure, politely and gracefully say, gosh, it's just not going to be the right fit for me, is it a nice opportunity to kind of share about the mindset of collective impact giving? And, actually I choose to do my impact, make an impact through this, idea or concept, or are there other kind of, if you were ever approached, because it is really hard when someone individually reaches out to you and says, can you please donate $50 to XYZ? It's really hard to look someone in the eyes, or a friend or a neighbor, and say no. So, but if you do your homework and you do decide that that's not the best decision, any opportunities or how to respond in that situation?
Right. Well, I mean, you have to look at it. Maybe you look at your funding, if it's $50 and it's your neighbor, and you kind of have to more look at it as if it's for their walk that they're doing. I tend to look at it as, this is maybe a special night out fund, and I'll just, it's $50 to the American Cancer Society. I'm just saying in general, or whatever the organization is, that I kind of look at it that way, instead of necessarily with impact giving, right? And so like when I give $50 to a walk, I'm not going to get a report the next year, 6 months to a year, saying, this is how we spent your money, Amy. And we did it and this $50 went to this program, and this is the results of that program. You don't hear about it ever again, right? And what the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund is that we make sure that when they're signing their grant contract, that we also include that they come back and they tell us in 6 months how they're doing, and then a year how they're doing. And it gets women really excited because it's like, okay, I'm having this impact. Or if, say, 6 months in, something isn't quite right, maybe they're not hitting the numbers that you're hoping, you're like, hey, what's going on? How can we support you, right? Can I learn more about what's going on? And so I think that that's, I mean, for me, having the impact results are very important in what you're giving. And then I think that's, you know, when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, in that you can select organizations that reflect great leadership qualities. And so when you're doing your voting, you can say, hey, you know, hey, why is this a high Hispanic area, but this executive, you know, they have nobody on their board that's Hispanic, and they're serving the Hispanic community. You know, like, can you tell me a little bit more about what your plan is to move forward as a board or as your staff? Or, I mean, I think that those are important questions that you can start asking, and you can make sure that then your investment and your charitable giving reflect what you want to see in society. Correct? So, Katie, I'm going to call on you. And I see Kathy too down there. She joined us late. So Katie, can you tell me what you think is the most rewarding part about giving to an organization when you see the impact?
Sure. You know, the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund has a very robust impact committee that works with the grantees to do it's 6 months and a year. Is that right? After the giving. What's most rewarding is to see just that measured impact, and knowing that it's in my community, and knowing that what we gave had that direct impact. But also what's so rewarding is, I think, reflected in the little bit in Soul Fisher, is it is just a major springboard. It helps these smaller organizations just, you know, hit that trampoline and go into making more of an impact than they ever dreamed possible with probably their original mission. You know, maybe they wanted to help 100 kids or whatever. And now because of the grant from SOS and the awareness we help build for them among the community, it's amazing to see where they go and how they grow. So, and growth isn't, I mean, always like the mission of those organizations, but maybe sticking with the kids, you know, for longer, or helping the, you know, tutor instead of one kid, the siblings too, or whatever. So, you know, growth isn't always the strategy of some of these organizations, but anyway, that's what I love seeing, those stories of connections and strengthening their missions.
So Kathy, I'm going to ask you a question. So I'm sorry, Meredith, did you have a question?
I did, but I don't want to interrupt.
Oh no, go ahead and ask a question.
No, so I'm sitting here thinking about how I really love like super micro or super local giving, because I think it does all the things you just were describing, that it's people within that community seeing and understanding what change needs to happen and focusing on it, as opposed to some outside person coming in in some sort of authority position being, oh, I have decided that you need this and I know better than you do about what you need, and so I'm going to impose this on you. But I wonder, as a sort of, as a, I don't know what the word, as an organization, you know, when you're considering how you're going to provide your support, do you all as an organization put any controls in place to sort of help you make sure that you're not falling into the role of sort of dictating, we think this is what's best for your community, so we're gonna, you know, carry that sort of bias or opinion with us in how we fund it? And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I say it because I think as humans, it's really easy to fall into that. And I will find myself doing that too. If, you know, this an effort to help, and oh, I think this would be so helpful for you, this other community I don't know. And like, what things do you all put in place as an organization to sort of help you walk that line of not imposing what you think they need as opposed to giving voice to what someone in that community is voicing that they need?
Well, I think that's a great question. So, you know, I think it starts with that they're making their proposal first, right? They're telling us what they want to do with their funding, and we don't change that. We may choose not to fund it, but we're not going to ask them to change what they're doing as their programming to fit some kind of initiative, right? I think that if we had a really narrow initiative, we would find that donors would be more likely to say, oh, you know, you're working with just little girls. We want to have an initiative to empower girls, which is nothing wrong with that. But so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to change our program to make it fit that narrow initiative. So people aren't doing that on their own, right? Because we're so wide that they pretty much apply for, I mean, other than animals, right? We pretty much fund pretty much everything. And we fund organizations that are smaller, right? The 1.5 million and less. But when we're going in and doing our site visits, I think that's the part that we have to do training with our women, because we have, you know, educated, smart women who are involved, and you want to go, hey, well, why don't you do that? Or why don't you do this? Or have you thought about that? And we have to make sure that we're trying to train our women to make, when they go in, they're there to ask questions, not to advise. Because it can be very, it can be pretty eye-opening when you're in a situation and you're not from that community or from that area of expertise that they're trying to change, and you put your own spin on things, right? I mean, yeah, I know that we had one woman who came to me and she said, you know, there's this organization, they're doing after school tutoring for the kids, and they're getting them computers. So each of the kids is getting a computer. And she said, I don't understand why they don't get used computers. They should be getting used computers because they'd save so much more time, right? But the truth is that, one, these kids never get anything new. And so it's putting priority on them, that they are worth having a new computer, correct? And that their education is that important, that they have one that works and that they can get access to internet. But also it's the cost of repairing the used computers. None of the software would be up to date, you know, because they have an old platform. And so, I mean, there's so many other things that are involved. And so you have to look at these organizations that are out in the community as the experts. I mean, they live there, right? And they're the most invested. They're the people that are going to be there today, tomorrow, next week, years from now, because they live in the community and they're part of that community. And so I think that's, so you have to learn to respect that. And, you know, we all fall into our own rose-colored glasses of how things should be, right? But it may not necessarily be a good, you know, a good strategy for that neighborhood or that nonprofit to do the things that I think they should do, right? It may not be as impactful. So, so Kathy, have you had any surprises that you've that you in donating and seeing these small nonprofits?
So I did the going on the site visits, first of all, and what you guys just talked about, that was the hardest thing, to be on the site visit and have like see little things that could just that I thought, okay, they could just tweak this and it would, but we're trained and you don't give feedback on the site visits, you just take information in and ask questions. But going to one of the things Katie talked about too, the growth, because these are such grassroots community organizations, they may not have that plan for strategic growth, but it happens organically. So when Little Bit saw that people needed glasses, whatever, then they start adding that on, and then maybe that's in their grant funding for the next time. It's those things, because they are happening organically and meeting the need. And the thing that really impressed me was seeing how these organizations were so much more effective than the organizations that were coming in top down, which is what I was more familiar with. And seeing them going to the sites and seeing, I went to one site visit where an organization was going into schools. And so we actually went to one of the schools with them and saw them and heard from the faculty and the principal how they are, it's not like the organization's an outsider. The faculty and the principal had really embraced the organization. And because of that, they were so much more effective that it wasn't, just people coming in and like handing stuff. It was creating community too. And that's the other thing. It's not only just giving all these organizations, and when they start working together and you're building community in addition to giving to the organization, because all that's happening together. And so that was, and the impact reporting is amazing. And that's one of the things that drew me to Spirit of St. Louis in the first place, was hearing that they do the impact reporting, because I hated just giving money and never knowing if it helped anyone, if anything came of it or whatever. And so seeing that and seeing how I imagine this year with everything going on in the pandemic, there's gonna be a lot of pivoting in this, where a lot of people were planning on like going into places and doing direct one-on-one things. Now they're having to pivot and figure out, okay, this is the community we wanted to support. How are we going to do that now? How is that changing? And these organizations can be nimble in working with them. I don't know, it is very rewarding. The other thing is when you know that they get that grant from, as Amy talked about, sometimes the first grant comes from Spirit of St. Louis, then it gives them kind of the street cred to get additional funding and other things, and it becomes like a launching pad. The hardest part is that there's so many good, worthy organizations. I think that was a surprise for me, how many I wanted to give to, and we just can't give to all of them. So you encourage them to apply again the next year. But it's been, I don't know, it's there. I realized how many things I had no clue about in our city. And I became so aware of a lot of just different little things going on that are amazing that you don't hear about. And that was very uplifting to me at a time when I was, I don't know, there are different times when you kind of get down about what's going on, and it just, I don't know, so selfishly, it fed me.
I think that's one that I met so many wonderful women too, right, within this organization. I mean, these are all women from all over the city, different neighborhoods, different areas of the St. Louis city, who I would
different
never
political spectrums, like
politically different, maybe economically different, but culturally different. But I think what was so interesting is that I find that there's so much like me, in that all the women want to learn more. They're all about, I want to learn more about my community. And they're also wanting to, they care about other people, and they really want to make an impact in the community. And so it was like instantly, I'm like, wow, you are very much like me. And to be, and even though you may vote different, we're coming together and we're doing something together. And it's definitely bridging communities. And I think that's really important.
I was going to actually, Amy, if you don't mind, I was going to ask, so whether it was through Spirit of St. Louis or thinking about Meredith in Denver and any collective giving organization, how to ensure that you have that diversity of thought, and how to ensure that it is a culturally and thought and background diverse group, and whether a selection process to be a part of it, and how to mindfully think about who you're pooling your money with and making these decisions with.
And I think that's a great question. And so much of collective giving organizations do grow organically, and it's usually a couple of friends and they invite another friend and come in and this kind of thing. But we have to be very purposeful in reaching out to different communities. We had great coverage in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch this past year about our organization, and all of a sudden we had all these different women from different areas that were like, hey, I want to be a part of that. I really feel like that would be great. But you have to be purposeful. I mean, you do have to reach out, and you have to make sure that different communities know about you. But we've been around for a while, right? We've been around since 2006. And so many of the nonprofit organizations now are starting to really know about us, right? And so the word's out. But I think what's really interesting, like talk about Chantel Fisher, right? The woman of Soul Fisher Ministry, who had built this organization. She's not making a lot of money, right? She's an executive director, and she takes care of a special needs brother and that kind of thing. But she is a member of the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund. Even as a grant, we granted to her, and after we granted to her, she said, you know what, this is where I want my charitable giving to go to, because I can see how I can help other little organizations like me. And now she's partnering with them. I got a great phone call from an organization called Girls in the Know that we had funded in the past. And they called and they said, we just want you to know we were filling out our PPP loan application to get, assistance from the government. And we all got on this Zoom call and we filled it out together. Like, we could ask each other questions, and we could have been like, if you can't figure it out, that's your problem, but that's not the community of the groups that we were funding. They all came together and they're like, we're going to help each other do this. And we've seen it in other ways too. Like we have events and our grantees will start talking to each other. We had one where we have Lydia's House, which is a domestic violence transitional housing a nonprofit, who we end up giving a $100,000 multi-year grant to for their bakery, which gives funding to the women who are who need a job in a safe place, right? And at one of our events, they met with IFM, which is one of our vaccine and shot organizations. They give vaccines to immigrant kids. And they got together and he goes, we can bring a clinic into your shelter, into the transitional housing shelter. And so they ended up taking 4 rooms, and now they have a permanent clinic on site there. And it was all because of interacting and working together as a small grantee. So I think that was great. Katie, did you have something to say?
Oh no, I was just waving goodbye to Meredith. She has to hop off.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, this is such a great discussion and such eye-opening, and I love that others who are involved with the organization were able to log on and share their experiences, and I'm grateful for this time. So thank you so much for sharing with us, Amy. This will be available on our YouTube channel, like all of our online programming, for people to be able to share. We'll link to it and for people to discover. Please be sure to check out if you want to rehear this discussion or find some other good ones. Thank you, Amy.